Welcome back to Whiskey Politics. I'm Dave Sussman, and I'm very pleased to be meeting with today Rick Berman. Rick is the president of Berman & Company, which is a public advocacy firm, which is different than a public relations firm. How do they differentiate?
Well, you probably have some bleeding between the two, but a public relations firm generally does all sorts of promotions for products, and maybe sometimes they'll do some lobbying. What we're doing is public advocacy, which is issue advocacy. I don't do products, I do ideas. And my whole goal is to manage public opinion. If you're lobbying, you're trying to manage the opinions of legislators. I would like to talk to the public and convince the public of certain points of view so that they in turn are empowered to talk to legislators with logical argument.
So it's political advocacy, and it really is to push certain agendas which your clients come to you with.
Yes, although I want to stress again, when you say political, a lot of people immediately think, oh, you're trying to get somebody elected. And I'm not. I'm trying to talk to the public about issues. Now, they may in turn ask a politician whether or not he or she agrees with a particular issue that I've put forth. But I'm not trying to get somebody elected. I'm trying to convince the public to use these arguments to determine if they want to vote for someone.
So in a classic sense, this is what a lobbyist does. This is what your firm is, as I assume near K Street in Washington, D.C. as a lobbying firm?
We are right off of K Street, but again, we're lobbying the public. We're not lobbying legislators.
Okay. So one of the things that was of interest to me was that a movie that came out approximately, about 10 years ago, some people have suggested that it was more or less based upon you or individually, if not you directly, but some of the stories that you got. What was it? Thank You for Smoking?
Thank You for Smoking, yes, was a Buckley book that was turned into a movie.
Right. And
yes, there are a lot of people who saw the movie, came to me or came to friends of mine and said, I think that book was based on Rick Berman. And generally because the book was about people who were lobbyists.
Right.
And I will admit to, in a former life, being a lobbyist before I started our public advocacy firm. And there were people there on screen who were talking about defending the right to smoke, defending the right to own guns, defending the right to do a variety of things that are oftentimes considered to be politically incorrect.
Right.
And I have defended and continue to defend the right for people to drink. I did defend the right of people to smoke in cigar bars. Where everyone working there, everybody going there, all knew that there was smoke in a cigar bar. I defended the right for people to have those bars, as well as people to go there. And in many ways, I am oftentimes thought of the guy who's got the politically incorrect agenda, but there's always a moderate point of view inside of all of those agendas that you can advocate for.
So wrapped around those issues are obviously a lot of political hysteria. I think, if I remember correctly, it was MSNBC that called you Dr. Evil. Or was that Rachel Maddow? Or what happened there?
Yeah, well, actually, there was a profile of me in USA Today.
Okay.
And they interviewed a guy from the AFL-CIO, and he said that he considered me to be Dr. Evil. And it was a joke. I know the guy pretty well, and he was joking around. Anyway, when 60 Minutes did a profile of me, they had seen that USA Today piece, and they said, oh, we want to use that Dr. Evil reference. And I said, well, it's really a joke. And they said, oh, we think it's good enough to put in the piece. So they did, and then it took off. And a lot of people use the term when they're trying to be critical, but I've embraced it. And I've said, well, I'm known as Dr. Evil by those people like the AFL-CIO who I think in their own right are pretty evil, and I have no problem considering the source.
So, New York Times, 60 Minutes, MSNBC, they did come after you in a fairly negative light. How do you personally handle that when, you appear to be somebody that embraces that and enjoys the confrontation to a certain extent, is that?
Yeah, well, I'm quite comfortable in getting these people upset.
Yeah.
They don't like the fact that, for example, I will tell people I protect the right to drink and drive, and people will say, "My God, you can't possibly be serious." And they start citing to me all these horrible accidents, and I said, "Well, those are drunk driving accidents." I said, "I didn't say I'm defending the right to drive drunk. I said I'm defending the right for somebody to have a glass of wine and get in their car and drive. I don't support drunk driving, and in fact, the woman who started Mothers Against Drunk Driving was an ally of mine in my trying to distinguish the difference between drunk driving and drinking and driving. When it came time to union issues, George McGovern was an ally of mine when he felt that the unions were overreaching and they were taking away the right of individual employees to have a secret ballot whenever they wanted to have a union election. And the unions don't like secret ballots. They like to have their authority certified without people having that right. And so McGovern was on my side. He actually produced a video for me. So if you take a look at these issues at a superficial level, it's always easy to make some accusation. If, on the other hand, you look at the nuanced differences between what I consider to be the overreaching of the other side and my position, you can say, oh, well, okay, Berman's position is reasonable. And I'm not absolutist. I never said that tobacco is good for you. I never said tobacco was a healthy product. On the other hand, I have said, look, the dangers of smoking are pretty well known. And if people want to continue to smoke without bothering other people, they should have the right to do it. Much like people, depending on the state you're in, you can ride a motorcycle without a helmet. And in other states, you have to wear a helmet. Well, when you ride a motorcycle without a helmet, you're obviously assuming a certain risk. And when you smoke cigarettes, you're assuming a certain risk. I think at some point in time, adults should be able to make these risk assumptions if they want to, as long as they're not harming other people. Now, then the argument is, well, then, a guy rides a motorcycle without a helmet, he drives up medical costs if he has an accident and if he doesn't have insurance. Of course, with Obamacare, maybe everybody has insurance. I don't know. But aside from that joke, there are a lot of people who do risky things who eventually end up causing the public to pay for their behavior. But if we're going to start telling everybody that you can't do so many things that involve risk, we'll all be staying in bed all day.
If I was to categorize this as a political philosophy, it would lead to a libertarian perspective. Is that something that you've had your entire life? Is that philosophy?
Yeah. When I heard the term libertarian the very first time, it was an absolutist description where we would have nothing done except we would have nothing done by the government except prosecute wars and build roads, highways. My philosophy is obviously not that extreme. But I found the libertarian label to be closer to me and my beliefs than any others. If you put it in the terms of Republican Democrat, I would say I'm socially liberal and economically conservative, which means I'm a hybrid of
It means you're a majority of Americans as well.
I believe so. I believe so.
Yes. Would you say that you're motivated more by philosophy or reward? Obviously, you run a successful business.
I do run a successful business. I was a corporate lawyer for years. I was successful in that. When I started doing what I'm doing, and it was a pretty rapid evolution after I left the corporate world, I just found that I was following my own instincts, and I would start to get involved with issues that I thought needed to be addressed, that the public was being misled by certain people who had agendas. And I went out and I found other people who had much more money than I do, and I said, listen, I have a way of talking to the public and getting them to understand that they're being told things that are not true. People are putting out twisted statistics. They're putting out junk science. I can correct the record But today, and this is pre-internet, to do that you need money. You need to take out ads. You need to get on radio with 30-second commercials. Quite frankly, today it's easier to do that and less expensive to do that because of the internet. But you still have to advertise. I mean, you can't put something up on the internet and expect that people are going to find it by themselves. I mean, there's millions of websites on the internet. So, but I have a lot of websites. I have over 25 websites that that people can use to get educated about issues.
Your business is really focused on not just entering and participating in a debate, but in your words, creating the debate.
You know, I do create the debate. If you were to go in my conference room, you would see on the wall, it says changing the debate. And I used to say when I was a lobbyist, as I said, I used to talk to members of Congress on a regular basis. I used to say that my business was changing the vote, which is what lobbyists do. Now I go upstream, and I want to change the debate. And if you think about it, public opinion is upstream from policy. You don't pass policy that is generally opposed by public opinion. I mean, it happens, but the general rule is that policy follows public opinion. It doesn't create public opinion. And so, yes, I'm in the business of changing the debate.
Are there any issues or particular areas of specialization that you've focused on over the years that now, in retrospect, you look back and you regret?
You know, there's nothing that I really regret. The only thing that it's unfortunate is that I don't have time to respond to every accusation. So, for instance, there was a time where I was helping the tanning industry. These are the people that make tanning beds.
Right.
You can go and you can get a tan. And, of course, people throw that out just like they throw out the tobacco issue. And I would say, well, now listen, there's no rule that says you can't go to the beach every day if you live in Miami or you live on some coast, on the coast, and get a suntan. You can do that all day long, and nobody restricts you. So I don't know what the big deal is if somebody wants to use a tanning bed, which is far more convenient than going to the beach to get a tan, if that's your objective. Well, you would think that I had taken a position that was totally irresponsible, and I say, well, I don't know that it's any more irresponsible than what I've just suggested about going to the beach. But people will use that and say, well, I'm just in it for somebody paying me a fee. Quite frankly, I don't need the money.
Right. So with that being said, the accusations, and if you go online, there's a lot out there. I mean, I brought up the Rachel Maddow situation. What happened there? I mean, do you want to? Yeah, well,
somebody, the left is always looking for ways to diminish our credibility.
Right.
And I take that as a badge of honor because if you're just a nuisance, nobody pays attention to you. So if you're a problem, they're trying to take you down. So Rachel Maddow, one day, I mean, I'd never met her, never talked to her, never had any interaction with her. One day she just pops up and starts accusing me of a variety of ills, talking about mercury in fish, which I had also tried to explain, and which the Food and Drug Administration eventually came around to agreeing with us, and that the warning on mercury in fish was overblown. But while it was developing, she used that as an example. She used minimum wage as an example. And so she did this for 3 or 4 nights in a row, just attacking, remember last night I told you about Rick Berman? Well, let me tell you about something else about Rick Berman. I thought, this is incredible. It's never happened. So I called her up and I said, I want to come on your show and, I want you to tell me this stuff to my face. And so she said, okay. And I went up to New York and sat across the table from her. And you can go to my website, bermanco.com, and look on my biography. And I put that video on there because she had nothing. She had absolutely nothing. And I'm quite proud of the fact that after that aired, her emails were running pretty heavily in my favor. And those are people who watch that show.
Good for you. Well, there's probably a few people there that have a libertarian streak as well. Let's focus back to the election that just took place. Before Trump, you were working for Cruz, was it?
I was trying to be helpful to Cruz, yes.
Okay, and then after Cruz dropped out, you moved over to the Trump column?
I moved over to, it was an evolution. And I was very, very concerned about Trump because of the way he campaigned, some of the things he said, some of the way he acted. But he was surrounded by people who I know, like Kellyanne Conway and Steve Bannon, who I have an enormous amount of respect for and who I like. And I thought, wow, there must be something more there. And then in the last few weeks of the campaign, when I think that they had convinced him that his campaigning, the way he was campaigning, was not productive, he did shift. And I actually thought that I really knew Donald Trump in the sense that we both grew up within a few miles of each other, and I just thought that he was kind of a larger than life version of who he was as a teenager, because I knew a bunch of people like Donald Trump, and I guess to some degree I was a little bit like that too. But when they saw these other people around him, who had moved over, Kellyanne was with Cruz, and she moved over to work with President-elect Trump, I started to shift, and then a couple of weeks, 3 weeks before the election, he was acting very differently, and then I became not only a Trump supporter, but I started to believe that he was going to win, because I knew that there had to be a silent vote out there for Trump. And most importantly, there's the complementary observation that people hated Hillary Clinton. And the math worked out that way. Admittedly, it was kind of a squeaker, but then again, most elections are a lot closer than people think that they are.
Right. Do you believe with President-elect Trump that his agenda and his policies are going to be in sync with lobbying as per what we've been used to seeing, or are they going to be more advocacy focused like your group now?
Well, I don't know. The jury's out as to how they're going to govern. In a lot of White Houses, everything is directed by the White House. I'm starting to believe with the strong people that he's putting in office at the cabinet level that he's going to operate more like a traditional CEO, where he's got vice presidents and he gives them a lot of authority and he says, go for it. If that's the case, I think you're going to have a mixed bag on the lobbying. In some cases, there will be lots of people who are going to see cabinet secretaries or the people below them, and they're going to be trying to get the agencies to take certain positions. The lobbying that takes place on Capitol Hill, I don't expect is going to change. And after all, that's where the laws are either developed or passed. So I don't think that the lobbying is going to change that much, except, as I say, it may be that the agencies have a greater role to play than they normally might.
Okay. There are specific issues that you have been involved with in the past, and I would assume that there's still going to be a need for that in the future. I'll give you one example, and one that's dear to me personally as a small business advocate is the minimum wage.
Right.
And we're seeing what's happening in different cities around the country. In Seattle and Los Angeles, small restaurants are having to move outside because they can't afford to keep people. Is that something that you think is going to be a fight in the next Congress, and is going to be national, or is it going to still be state-controlled and local? And would you be involved in that?
Well, I will be involved with that. I mean, I've been involved with the minimum wage issue. As I said, I have about 25 websites. Actually, I have more than that, but about 25 active ones. To show you how long I've been involved in minimum wage, I own minimumwage.com.
Wow.
So I've been at this for a while. The interesting thing about minimum wage is much like a lot of the other issues I've talked about, and that is to say, if you tell somebody that you're opposed to an increase in the minimum wage, or you're opposed to a big increase in the minimum wage, which is really where I am, then you find that people think that you're the devil. And I say, well, look, first of all, it's not an anti-poverty tool any longer. The demographics have changed dramatically as to who works at the minimum wage. So just by way of background, before I answer your question, the average family income of a minimum wage worker today is about $55,000, which says to you, well, you say, well, how can that be? And I say, well, it's because they are second or third wage earners in a family. And when people start to use the example of somebody that lost their job as a machinist at a factory and now they're working at Burger King or McDonald's, you say, yeah, those examples are there, but they are not the typical. They are not the typical minimum wage employee. They are still not that. The 1 in 10 people who work at the minimum wage are people who have a poverty-connected situation, but 90% of the people are not connected to it. And when people try to use it as an anti-poverty tool, you have to respect the fact that 60% of the people in poverty don't have a job. So it doesn't do any good for those people to raise the minimum wage. It just makes it harder for them to get a job. For whatever reason, they weren't getting a job before. They're getting less likely. They're getting to be less likely to land employment with a much higher wage. But I don't think it's going to take place at the federal level. I don't think that there's any appetite for it. And quite frankly, because so many states and localities have started to go for a higher minimum wage at the local level, I think that the momentum is there to keep doing that. Now, the political dynamics to go for a small increase in the minimum wage, let's say, it's now it's at $7.25, to go to, let's say, $9. Yeah, I could see where that could happen, but I don't see it going any higher than that. Obama just, a couple of years ago wanted $10. Mm-hmm. So I could see where they could get it together to go for $9, but not any higher than that.
Okay. Do you believe that there is the appetite for that debate after this election? And I think when I'm asking because it's a very localized issue as well. Again, California, Washington. We know what happens in California moves east.
Right. Well, first of all, I don't think that there's any appetite for the debate at the federal level, if for no better reason than the fact that there's only so much time and only so much energy that's attached in any Congress to issues. Mm-hmm. And this issue is going to get crowded out by so many other issues. And, you have Republican majorities who will say, the concept of federalism is to leave these things to the states. And so that's always a good default option to say,
10th Amendment.
Let the states do it. And if California wants to do it, that's fine. I mean, California's got its own problems in the sense that, a high minimum wage in San Francisco or Los Angeles is going to be far more defensible than it is going to be in inland California, in some of the rural communities.
Right.
And so if the state is going to do that, they're going to find, when we get down to Modesto, in farming communities, it's going to have devastating impacts. And it's not just me saying it. I mean, economists say it. We do big surveys of economists, most of whom are Democrats, and who say that these $15 minimum wage increases are crazy.
It's devastating.
Yeah.
Now, one of the things that made an impression on me was how you framed the debate, and goes back to what your business does. You have teams of roving reporters on video, right? You go out to, I think it's Times Square and other places, and you ask questions, the same question, but with different words, relating to the minimum wage. What happens there?
Yeah, well, so for example, if you ask people, what do you think about a $15 living wage? You will get one answer. If you ask the very same people, what do you think about a $15 starter wage? They'll go, oh no, that's crazy, that's way too high. Uh-huh. Well, it's the same, and you're talking about the same issue, right? But as soon as you put it in their head that it's a starting wage, they've got a different attitude than if you tell them that it's a living wage, which conjures up a different set of facts and therefore, the need for a higher number. So how you frame issues is very important. And one of the problems, conservatives, for the most part, have not done a very good job of framing issues. Right. Now, you can, to move over to a social issue, here's how people can see it in stark relief. The people who are involved in the abortion fights, which have been going on forever, they've got right to life and right to choose. And you frame it in rights, and then you say, if you only hear about right to choose, you think, I think people should have the right to choose. And then you say, well, how about right to life? Oh, yeah, people right to life. And next thing you know, you're twisted and torn between two concepts, both of which individually sound legitimate. So now the question is, who's controlling the debate?
Right. And that's why people like you exist out there. Last question for you. Post-election, moving into a Trump administration, are there any particular issues that are on the table right now that you're seeing Trump discussing, maybe members of his cabinet that are coming in, that are leading you to think in one direction or another what the next few years are going to be like, not just for you and your business and need, but for the country? Are you optimistic? Are you concerned?
First of all, I'm far more optimistic than I would be if Hillary was in there and her crowd.
Okay.
Secondly, I think that there probably won't be as much rollback as there will be freezing of some of the crazy ideas that were on the table and which would have continued to go forward had Hillary gotten elected. But keep in mind, again, it's the Congress that has the right and
Right.
the obligation to pass laws. So I think the agencies are going to cut way back on regulatory activity. I think they'll unwind some of the stuff that the Obama administration has done. And look, regulations have the same impact as laws when it gets right down to the business, or it gets right down to the average person who has to deal with government. A regulation is nothing more than an articulation of a law that was passed.
Right.
So at the end of the day, if you can roll back or stop some of those regulations from being implemented, you've basically changed the law, and I think there's going to be a lot of that.
Well, you guys are going to have your hands full because there's a lot to repeal.
There is, and and my job is to see to it that people understand what's going on and say, "Oh, yeah, I've never thought of it that way before, but that's logical." And if I can get people to say that, I think we've won.
Well, I think so. Just as a side note here, one of the things we learned at Leadership Institute, I don't know if you've heard of them, it's a conservative leading training campaign, is it's about the message. It is the number one, especially for conservatives, because the left, they have the emotional debate, and emotion always wins, especially people that are unknowledgeable of the issues.
You're right. I tell people you can have your intellectual argument, you can have your emotional argument, and emotion trumps thinking all day long.
Absolutely. Rick, we find you at rickbermanco.com?
Bermanco.
Bermanco.com. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it.
My pleasure, David.
Thank you.